Don't be too myopic, even if you are very focused. You need to understand how everything you do fits into the bigger picture. Find a gap or a need and figure out a better way to do it, and that'll go a lot further than spending a year trying to build something and then hoping people want to buy it.
Hello and welcome to the Jumpstart podcast with Jeffalytics. I'm your host, Jeff Sauer. Today, for our 32nd episode, we'll talk with Dan Golden, president of Be Found Online and an adjunct lecturer at Depaul University in Chicago. Dan and I first met back in 2014 when I moderated his session at HeroConf in Austin. And looking back at our old email exchanges, Dan's actually a pretty funny guy. He asked that I introduce his session like Michael Buffer from the boxing matches or wrestling matches, and he asked if I could bring a fog machine with me. Now, that was pretty awesome, but naturally, I declined. I told Dan that he really didn't need to rely on gimmicks. He just needed to prove his knowledge at the conference. But that's also the same advice that I gave Dan for our podcast recording session. I just wanted him to tell his story, share some of the secrets to his success, and hear about where he has become an expert. So we recorded this session when I was staying in Washington, D.C., and this intro is being recorded out of my hotel room in Sydney, Australia, after I just got off a 15-hour flight from the United States. So this Australia thing is a punctuation mark on what's been a really intense 2 months for me of teaching, speaking, working on my next product launch for Jeffalytics. And actually, that's something I wanted to talk to you about here, and that is this product that we have coming out. It's going to be an online course and support network that focuses on building profitable and growth-oriented digital marketing agencies. Now, that's a lot of words, but if you're a freelancer or a small agency owner, this course might be the perfect fit for you. It's basically advice that I wish that I would have had when I started my agency. So if you wanted to learn more, you can go to agencycourse.com to sign up for our mailing list and get a head start on knowing when the course is going to be released. So why do I mention my new course in this intro? Because there's actually a lot of gems that Dan provides in his interview that really, I think, are going to hit home during our course as well. Dan has an awesome story, complete with an inspirational journey about how he grew his agency to be one of the fastest growing agencies in the United States 5 years in a row. The other thing I liked about Dan is that he also talks about his passion projects. One of them is the Employers for VTO organization. And for those of you who have been living under a rock, there's an election happening in the U.S. on November 8th. And even if you're not in the U.S., you've probably been unable to escape the coverage. Dan's organization encourages employers to give their employees paid time off and perform their civic duty. So I commend him for that. And that's about as much as I'm ethically allowed to talk about the upcoming election in the United States. Enough politics. We want to hear from a smart agency owner who has figured out the business side of things and hear about his journey to success. For show notes, visit jeffalytics.com/golden. Okay, so we're here today with Dan Golden. Dan, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to your story as well. I know we met, a couple years ago at HeroConf, and look forward to getting some more depth behind what we talked about then. And so let's start out with the origin story. How did you get started? What was the aha moment you had to get involved in digital marketing?
Sure. I don't know if it could be described as aha, but I was just graduated from college and was pursuing a very serious career as a traveling musician. So my college band decided to stick with it, and spent a couple years touring, and as any touring band, you need that day job. So I had two options lined up. One was working at a cigar store downtown, and the other, there was this search engine marketing internship. And so I remembered having searched from stuff when I was in school, and I was like, I've always thought I could maybe do some computer type stuff. I had no idea. That was in 2003, right after AdWords had launched, and really good luck and maybe some good intuition, making the right decision there, and got in very early and had a great mentor, and that kind of set me off on my path.
Nice. Well, one question I have is, what type of music did you play in the band?
I was guitar player and singer. We called it crime jazz. It was a kind of a jazz fusion rock band. We were sort of in the jam band scene in the early 2000s. Had some success and had a booking agent, and it was a lot of fun, but not necessarily a career per se.
Yeah.
So still friends with those guys. Still play a show every year or two, and I'm now mostly playing ukulele in the basement for my toddler.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah.
How the times have changed.
Yes. Well, obviously, it sounds like you didn't take the job at the cigar shop. You took the internship, and that really made a huge difference in everything. Can only assume, and we're going to get into that in just a second. So, so you go to this internship, and how does that work? Is it basically a full-time job in between gigs? What do you do there?
I mean, what I loved about it, what really got me excited about search marketing was it was so results driven. I was an economics major in college and actually applied a lot of that stuff because it was math, right? So we were still dealing with some transparent bidding platforms where we could, back in the good old days, I like to say, where you could bid jam your competition, and what you paid as a CPC was a little bit more predictable.
Mm-hmm.
So it was results based, and I learned how to do pivot tables, and there were a couple of bid management platforms out there, but everything was still very much in its infancy. So it was you kind of and there wasn't as much training back then. It was just dive in and test stuff and learn how to do it and figure out what breaks and figure out how to fix it. We had a tech team that could code some stuff in databases so we could look at lead performance, and man, the stuff that we have available to us today is light years ahead. But I don't know, 15 years ago we dug in and just figured out a lot of the same stuff that I think is standard practice that marketers are doing today.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I like the economics degree and how it's very similar to what we're doing with the data and the search and basically how to think about these things that we have in front of us. Because I've noticed that people who have like finance and economic degrees definitely latch on to search marketing pretty easily because those degrees teach you how to think. And instead of thinking about, and it's just a different set of data, right? It's just a different outcome that you're looking for, but it's the thought process that really goes into it.
Yeah, I mean, it's with performance marketing, I mean, it's profit maximization and figuring out where a lot of those that as you learn, and this is where I think there's challenges in terms of learning, and I'm using air quotes, you can't see it, it's a podcast, but learning how to do this stuff in school and then applying it in the real world. In economics classes and in statistics, there's these equations for maximizing profit and figuring out where you start hitting diminishing returns. But it's when you get in the practice of actually running campaigns, you have competitors that also chase that are going to chase you or jump in and out of the marketplace. So it certainly takes some adjusting, moving from an academic mindset to a practical, like we're doing it right now mindset. But there's, I actually think there's a lot to apply from some of that, some of the basic statistics and analytics that you learn in school. And I know there's a lot more training nowadays that is more practical, versus taking stuff from a textbook that was written 20 years ago and applying it to Google AdWords.
Yep. So you're in this internship. What's the environment like that you're working in during this internship?
I had a really good mentor, Cam Balzer, who's gone on to a lot of great things. I actually followed him over to Performix a year or two after I started working for him at Consumer Guide. He taught me some of the basics, and really, and this is something I look for when we're interviewing people for BFO. He taught me how to learn and taught me how to figure stuff out. Because there wasn't a way of doing it, right? And every new thing that we tested was something new we were trying to figure out and build. So it certainly upped my game in terms of Excel skills and taking data from one place and matching it up with another and manipulating it. There weren't a lot of templates, there weren't a lot of platforms for it, and it's just a roll up your sleeves and do it.
Yep.
I think we still have to do a lot of that today as we're, certainly Google AdWords and the platforms we use for that are very mature, but we're testing LinkedIn ads and Pinterest ads and new things that Facebook is testing, and it's similar to what was happening 15 years ago, right? New platforms come out and the ad products behind them and some of the clunkiness that, I'm going to make a Yahoo Gemini joke, that, a lot of these new platforms, you still have to take a database or your Google Analytics and export it and to be able to manipulate which ads are working, and not every platform is as connected and integrated as AdWords. So I think some of the some of the learning from a long time ago is a great thing to apply forward as we're trying to innovate and test new platforms. And that's really what the role of a digital media manager needs to look like. Certainly with machines taking over a lot of the bidding and optimization, there's still a lot of work that needs to get done from a marketer standpoint of just connecting all the data, and a way to manipulate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good lesson. I learned that too, is that when you get in this industry, you might have the knowledge of like tactically how search works or whatever you're going into. Nowadays, it would be maybe more like social, like you said, LinkedIn ads, these different areas. But it's always great to be around a business person who's been around a while, who's been through technology cycles, and they can tell you how to think about it from a business perspective. They can be that bridge, that translator, and having you really translate it to business issues. And I think we sometimes think that just because we know a system, that's the important thing. But the reality is it's how does that system help the business grow? And sometimes you need that person who's a little bit been around a few times to guide you in that area. And then the combined output between those two, the person who operates a system and the person who has the business context, can be really super valuable, that output.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a tactician or as a practitioner, it's very easy to kind of think within the confines of the platforms you're playing in, and we have all of these metrics that are so important to us that Google made up, or I don't know, Google didn't make up click-through rate, but all of these words and CTR, cost per lead, cost per converted lead, all of the metrics that we look at as digital marketers, and you have to when you're optimizing and in the weeds. And then, you get on the phone with the CMO and they don't care about all that stuff, right? You certainly need to be able to translate. How can we translate all of these metrics? Because this isn't going to change. There's more data than anybody knows what to do with. But just turning that into real insights that are speaking our client's language and not our own language. That's, I think, the biggest barrier.
Yeah, absolutely. So this internship, how long does it go on for? And were you still in the band the entire time? What's your timeline of this all going through?
So I was, so my 6 months, I had 3 to 6 months into the internship, my boss actually went over to Performix and was immediately trying to bring me over there. And I was still playing in the band, and could you imagine that they wanted me to work 40 hours a week, 5 days a week? It baffled me. There was no way I could do that and still spend 3 nights on the road and all of that. Oh boy, that a 40-hour work week now seems like it would be the easiest thing on earth. But the band decided to disband, and a few of the gentlemen went on to grad school. A few of them are still doing some really really great stuff in the music world. And as that was kind of fizzling down, it was time to start thinking a little bit more about a career. But what I would also say is I've got a lot of overlapping timelines. Is I've always kind of had a little bit of that entrepreneurship in me. My dad always had his own companies. My brother was in the middle of launching his company, and we had spent a week together at Burning Man and talked a lot. I was kind of explaining to him all the stuff that I was doing with internet marketing, and he was just about to start his home energy efficiency company, and was like, "Could you do that stuff for me?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely." And I used to say I had a 9 to 5 and a 6 to midnight. And so, I started launching campaigns for him, and sure enough, like, his business exploded, and it was all based on Google AdWords because no one was doing it in that space. There were very few people doing what he was doing, but none of them knew internet advertising. So that was, I had the day job, and I created a DBA for Be Found Local. And while I was at my internship, I would take my hour-long lunch break and sit in the parking lot on my cell phone calling people, and I use Microsoft Outlook, so I would send all these sales emails, at 1 o'clock in the morning, but I would set it so that it would actually send out at 7:45 a.m. or 9 a.m. or kind of like phase it throughout the day. I've always been doing a lot of different things, and that side project kind of grew basically through referrals.
Yeah.
So he had other vendors, some folks that were doing what he was doing in different markets, and ended up having a little bit of a client portfolio. And this is also where I probably had some. I've pivoted a number of times on the business front. I was very bullish on the SMB market. Trying to do what Reach Local and the others were trying to build, just because it was such an underserved market. But I certainly didn't understand about scaling a sales force and the kind of business model you need and the ratios of account loads to people that companies like that need to hit. But it was a great way to kind of jump in and start a business. The barrier to starting a business nowadays is very low, but building credibility and scaling beyond one individual practitioner is, that's why most marketing agencies don't have the same kind of growth that BFO has had. So learned a lot of those lessons along the way.
Yeah, that's great. So what's the time frame from is it like a few years that you get to this point? Is it, obviously you're freelancing during the internship. I actually, that's a very similar story to how my agency really took off. Was we were doing lead gen for home improvement services, like basically generating leads, and then they told their friends and their friends told their friends, and suddenly we're like, wow, this is a business. It's sort of weird how it came out of nowhere. But basically, if you can do good work for people, others start to take notice and they want some of that as well.
I think we could just delete the rest of the business books out there, because you really summed it up. There's a lot of other nuances to it, but that's always how we now have a sales team and a marketing team, but the first 5 years of BFO, we had none of that. We just did good work, and people referred stuff our way.
Yeah, and I think that's how a lot of agencies get started, is on reputation. It doesn't always scale to the level. It doesn't scale infinitely, but it does scale for a while. And like you said, that you can get by on that for several years before before the marketing department even gets involved with it.
Yeah. So back to answering your question. So I've always kind of had this, the side project. I think I started a few months into my internship and continued that. I wasn't doing a whole lot when I had, so I was at the internship for about a year, moved over to Performix when the band broke up, and that's when I really got some of the big agency experience and got to learn a whole lot and work with a lot of great people and work on some very big clients. And, concurrently I had a few of those side project clients.
Yep.
I was at Performix through DoubleClick, through the Google acquisition, and I got out of there shortly after Google acquired us. And thought that would be a good time to kind of jump in. And, I had a small portfolio of clients, so it wasn't like I had to, jump in completely and start from scratch, which made that, I think, a little bit easier of a landing. And I went to work part-time for a startup that was in the lead gen space, and again, got a lot of great learning there, but ended up taking them on as a client, one of BFound's first large clients, as opposed to a day job. So did a fair amount of jumping around, but I think I always wanted to have my own company, and it just sort of evolved. When we first launched, and again, some of this was a connection of that first client from my brother. There was a partner of theirs that sold hot tubs, and they were this eco-friendly outdoor sales company. And we got connected to we did a small campaign for one store, connected to their manufacturer, and we became the agency of record for this hot tub company. And so, originally I thought we were going to be selling hot tubs and really kind of this verticalized SMB sales and marketing platform. And the one piece of advice I would give to other agencies as you're starting up is you got to go where the food is, right? You can build a business plan and say, we are X, Y, and Z, and we are focused on this market, and good luck finding that. If you've got all that lined up and you have the sales channels lined up, good on you.
Yep.
But
It's not how it really works in the real world, though. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's like the Mike Tyson saying, which is everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yeah.
I think that's really like, yeah, you can have the perfect plan for how your business is going to work. But the reality is it's who's going to pay you money. Like who's going to pay you money in order to do something for them. And whether you like doing it, whether you enjoy doing it, and whether you can do it in a repeatable way. That's ultimately what your business becomes in many ways, at least your first business. I think if you go through it a few times, you can start to like learn what you did right and wrong and then apply that to the new business. But generally speaking, it's who wants to give me money, and if it's the hot tub company, then that's one thing. If it's I worked with window companies, and it was very similar. They're just like, hey, you're the window guy, and I was like, really? I haven't replaced windows on my own home. How do I don't know anything about this.
Yeah.
But they kept on calling, and they kept on calling every day, a new person saying, hey, I heard you did good work for this guy. Can you do good work for me? And you look back at it over the course of a year, like, wow, we have a business here. We have a business segment we've tackled.
Yeah. One of the shifts we had, and again, never would have planned for this in a business plan, is partnering with other agencies that didn't do what we do. There's search marketing is no longer new. It's always funny when we're talking to clients about new tactics, and the term is used, traditional search, the text ads, the keyword buying, as like this old traditional thing. Like it's almost treated like TV or radio when we're talking about digital media plans.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds old and traditional, but it's still, for many people, it's still the main driver of their business. And so, yeah, I think it's harder to break into it, but it's still pretty important.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I mean, it sounds like the transition was pretty straightforward, and I'd love to get into your agency even more. But I have to ask you about this stint you had as the king of search.
Yeah,
because that might be the best title since Rand Fishkin, the Wizard of Moz, was on the podcast.
Oh wow, that's awesome. Well, so that's the joy of startups, is you get to kind of come up with your own kitschy name. There's actually I'll follow up with this, but there's a Silicon Valley title generator. It's just a website. It'll just combine ridiculous words to be your, Wizard of Tech Ops or whatever that is.
Yeah. That's great. And so then you have this agency, and you was Be Found Local, you said, and then eventually you chose Be Found Online. Is that around the same time when you did that, or? Yeah.
So I'll go through the quick story. So Be Found Local. That's what we're taking a lot of different streams here, but it's all coming together. So yeah, that first company, that's the 6 to midnight, that was Be Found Local. Again, kind of focused on the SMB market, and that was always the side project. And I've got a partner in Be Found Online who had founded his own SEO agency around the same time that I had left Consumer Guide to go for Performix. And so we've been collaborating over the years. We shared some clients and worked on a few other little side projects here and there. And so at one point, we had been working together for, I think, 2 or 3 years. We were sharing a couple of interns. We realized that we hadn't billed each other in 9 months. So that was right at the beginning of 2009, and we spent a weekend together and did some math, and took his SEO consulting agency, my little paid search agency, and created Be Found Online. So that was great. That was at the beginning of 2009.
Nice. That is the streams coming together and then forming something. And so now you have a partner is a really, like, it's something that I like to know about, is just partnerships and taking it on. But it sounds like you have two sides of the coin. You have paid and you have organic. Let's combine them together and do something more. But not only that, but let's combine clients. Let's just get some efficiencies of scale in what we're doing here. And I'm guessing that that was a big catalyst to growing the agency and to getting to the point where you are now.
Yeah, that back then, that made a ton of sense, and we're certainly in the mode right now of our roots are as a search shop, but we're doing a ton of display and social and content and all the other stuff that kind of rounds out the offering that digital agencies need to deliver. But yeah, that was it made a ton of sense back then, and it was every client of his needed what I did, and vice versa.
Yep.
And kind of around that time, I could pinpoint some of our good luck back to a rooftop Cubs game. And I was 7 innings in, and if you've been to the rooftop of a Cubs game,
I have.
The drinks flow.
Yes.
And I got a phone call from an old friend that I had worked with at a couple of companies back, and he had just landed at a very large agency, and they had a pitch that was due the next morning, and someone told him that afternoon that they needed to add some digital stuff to it. So he calls, and he's like, "So this company you started, can you do some of this stuff? Because we don't have a digital team." And
nice.
I slurred, "Absolutely, I can." And left the game, grabbed some coffee, and called Steve, and we stayed up all night and just worked on a pitch. And it was, some of the stuff was so new. So we pitched. It was for a major retailer, 600 locations, and we pitched. There was a lot of stuff they needed. We looked at, their local search profiles were all messed up, and they had all these reputation issues. So, we prioritize local search and review management and reputation management and kind of the SEO project that goes along with it. And our slides got thrown into a 150-page pitch deck. We weren't there. We were just kind of contributed to it. And the CMO saw the whole deck, told the agency, "I think we're going to hire you, but we have to start local search and reputation management tomorrow." At which point we got the call, and we were like, "Okay, we should probably figure out how to service local search and reputation management." Because a lot of this stuff is new, and we're smart guys. We knew we could figure it out, and it was less about building a product and coming up with a business model, but finding a need and then figuring out how to do it, which is the other sage piece of advice if you're an agency. Find a gap or a need and figure out a better way to do it, and that'll go a lot further than spending a year trying to build something and then hoping people want to buy it.
Yep, I would agree with that. It's like, even in any industry, really, it's get people to pre-buy what you have to sell. That means that you have a business that's viable if people are willing to pay for it before you even create it, versus, like you said, spending a bunch of time creating something and then hoping that you get results. The other thing that I thought was really interesting with what you said there is the difference between knowing how to do reputation management for yourself, or local SEO. Maybe you can do it in one instance, but how do you scale it? And can you scale it? That's another thing where you don't really know whether you can do that until it's presented to you, but you have to give it a try. Otherwise, you'll just never know. So you can't be too cautious about these things. Otherwise, nobody will ever trust you with the business if you're not confident that you can make it work.
Yeah, and like review management, right? There's hundreds of really good platforms out there that are plugged into Yelp and Google, and I could name a good chunk of them. But that stuff didn't exist in 2009, right? So we used SEO crawlers and hired an intern to go Google stuff. You figure out a way to do it, and then you figure out a smarter way. Once you kind of elbow grease it and figure out what the output is going to be and what's going to work for the client, then you build it.
Yeah. And I think that if you have an infinite supply of money and time and patience, you can do that. But you also have to be so confident that you made the right move, versus in iterations and minimum viable products, whatever, that at least gives you feedback that you're on the right track. So I'm curious about, just the progression then. So it sounds like you have this business, you're offering and expanding your services. Is that just like a continuation? Do you keep on doing that? Do a bunch of clients come in? Is there core services? How does it go from there? I see that you were on the Inc. list several times. How did you get to the point where you're at today?
Sure. Well, we've gone, as of this year, we're five years in a row on the Inc. list. So we've been growing pretty steadily, and I attribute it to a lot of different things. Some of it is expanding our offering. So going after new, again, we have our roots as being a search agency, but there's a lot of other services that go alongside that, and it's a challenge we've had because I don't I don't want to do stuff that we're not great at. And, so there's, but on the other half of it, we've got a lot of clients that don't want to go to 3 or 4 or 5 specialist agencies for every little thing. So it's a conundrum growing agencies have around, do you specialize? Do you expand your services? And that's, that's a challenge balancing growth and focus. So I think we've done a little bit of both. There's services that I know we're never going to do in-house, like web design. There's so many good firms out there, and we have so many different types of clients between retail and lead gen that I know it was something we couldn't be great at, and there's a lot of companies that are.
Yep.
So some of that is just piecing together an ecosystem of partnerships that are, that drive business to us and that allow us to execute on behalf of our clients without trying to fake it in-house.
Yep.
And our clients appreciate that when we're like, this is important. We don't do this in-house, but we've got a great partner. Here they are. We all work together. You win. You get the best in class of everything without necessarily having a Frankenstein approach of a bunch of agencies cobbled together that don't like each other and each want to steal business from each other. And there's a lot that could go wrong in those types of scenarios, and we found just finding partner agencies that match our values and the ways that we operate can really put together a best-in-class solution for our clients without a lot of the infighting that happens when competing agencies are all working on different pieces of the business.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that there's a lot of value in doing that. And obviously just looking at being on the Inc. list 5 times in a row, that means that's an indicator that it's working too, seeing that success roll in. So it sounds like, you've gotten to the point where it's in a good place now with the agency. And actually I have a bunch of like rapid fire questions about just agency side and just a bunch of other things on that. So I think it might be a good time to transition into that just to learn some more about specifics around what you're doing.
All right. I'm ready. Start shooting.
Awesome. What's the difference between managing search on the client side and being on the agency side? Because I know that you did spend some time, I believe, on the client side.
Yeah. I mean, it's some of this I would say comes down to individuals and how they like to operate and the kind of world and environment they want to operate in. Some people really like to focus and feel like they're building one thing, and client side makes a lot of sense for those types of folks. On the agency side, there's just so much that you get exposed to as, working on multiple clients and sitting in a room full of people that are all doing search. I think that's the amount of learning that you get from the people sitting next to you who have different experiences, different types of clients, different types of challenges. That's what I love about the agency side is just, putting your thinking cap on in a bunch of different situations. And we actually have a lot of clients that have full-time search people in-house and are still great clients and partners of ours.
Yep.
As search and some of these digital channels are no longer TV's little stepchild, it makes sense for clients where lead gen or e-com is core to their business to have some staff internally. And I think there's also value for having an agency on board who can bring some of that new thinking, extra bandwidth, continuity. There's a lot of ways that agencies can add value even when clients are starting to build some of their in-house teams.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that the product's better when the client is informed. So you do a better job as a marketer, as an agency marketer, if the client is informed and they know what they're talking about. Just because they aren't involved day to day with everything doesn't mean so they can really augment their extra hours by hiring an agency to do things. Yeah,
and I actually have a fun anecdote to add to that. It was a conversation I was having with the CMO of one of our partners, and he was just kind of explaining, in-house versus agency. And they had some small campaigns, and he had his in-house team running because the budgets didn't make sense for an agency to manage. And he was sitting in the meeting, and it was everybody in the room was because they were all working on it, was just trying to talk about how great everything was. And we did this test on LinkedIn, and it was a success. And we drove this many clicks, and it was a good test. And He was just kind of sitting back. He was like, "This is why we need an agency. Like, the end result is better when you have informed people on the client that are challenging." Agencies and clients, and this is why, what I love about some of our most engaged clients is they it's not all just sunshine and rainbows. Like, they're there to challenge us, and it's also an agency's job, especially from an SEO standpoint as consultants, to come in and challenge your client and say, like, no, you don't have to do it that way, right?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of value you get from having the agency-client relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a ton of value in being able to hold each other accountable and to, cross-train and everything too. Next one. So what's broken on the agency side that needed a facelift and prompted you to start Be Found Online? You can tell we've been digging into your LinkedIn profile on that one.
Sure. I think a lot of large agencies have creative, account services, media, the planning team, but account services is the one who's responsible to the client, who does all the talking. So all these teams kind of like inform and funnel stuff through account services, and search, with all of the nuances that we have, and especially with SEO where it's really consultative and technical, that model of keeping the specialists at bay and having account people try and oversee and manage everything and explain why our CPL was up, all of the details and nuances.
Yeah.
To an extent, clients appreciate when you're honest and say, you know what, I really want to talk to someone on the team who knows that, but there's a limit to how many times you could say, let me talk to someone and get back to you, versus being engaged on the line and being able to answer those questions.
Yep.
I will say, as we've scaled BFO, I'm challenging us on that model a little bit to find really what the best hybrid is.
Yep.
We found that there's a typical path at a large agency or a large search agency where you start as an intern, associate analyst, senior analyst, associate account manager. There's 12 more steps before you get an office. The path is start doing bids, and then eventually you're talking to clients all day. And some of our best employees at BFO don't want to be talking to clients and dancing on the phone all day. They like being technical. They like and so we really want people to be able to pave their own path and figure out what they're good at and what they're best at, versus kind of being funneled through one way of doing things.
Yeah, I like that, and I think that it sounds like it's similar to how you look at having other agency partners involved in the at the same time. So like we have a question here, is like, how do you make a multi-agency partnership work without bossing the other person around? It sounds like it's very similar, as you let people shine where they have the best skills.
Yeah, and and just some of the basic, you could take this stuff from a dating book, right? Transparency, openness, communication. The stuff that we're doing needs to be integrated. Like search does not operate in a vacuum. I learned that lesson hard and fast about, I don't know, it was 5 or 6 years ago, and we were with our agency partner, and I was just very, very, very focused on the paid search account that we were doing, and that was our report, and that was our piece of it. And the last week's report, we killed it off the hook. The return on ad spend was way up, volume was up 30%, and we went in guns blazing talking about how awesome we were, and the account services person was like, we launched TV on Tuesday. And that was if I've had an aha moment, that was one of them. Is just a great reminder that everything we do is plugged into something much bigger than the channels that we're managing.
Yeah, and sometimes you might think you have something to do with it, but it might be probably those external factors. I think that is something that a lot of agencies, especially in search, underestimate, and that is just the value of somebody's brand. And I've seen it happen all kinds of times where you try the exact same ad with a different domain name or a less known brand, and it doesn't perform nearly as well. And so these are the things where once you've been around for a while, you can start to say, well, is this a brand that I can even help? Or should they focus on creating the brand in the first place? Great. So tell me some more about open book management.
Sure. So this is, in line with kind of the values at BFO and how we want to operate. There's a lot of different approaches to open book management, and I've been there at big companies when you see the quarterly report, and here was our EBIT last quarter. We're up, or we're down, or we're flat, which is great. There's a lot of companies that don't even do that, or aren't necessarily transparent in any sense of the word. And the approach that we've taken is a lot more active, which is okay, we had a good quarter last quarter. bravo. What does that mean, right? What does that mean for this quarter? And more importantly, like, what can we do about it? And what can, and by we do, it's not just the owners of the business, but what can everybody who's sitting in that room do to contribute to how we're going to do this quarter or next quarter? So that's the approach that we take. We've got a weekly huddle where we go over our dashboard. We look at our critical numbers, but we also look at projections for where we're going to land this month and this quarter. And we've built a bonus structure that's centered around that. So there shouldn't be any surprises with our team because we're watching those numbers, and in some cases, the full team knows what the gap is. So great example. This happened last year, and it happens all the time actually now. Where we had a $20,000 gap towards the end of the quarter. We had 20 days left in the quarter, and if our net income went up by $20,000, then everybody would get the bonus tier. So what we need to make sure doesn't happen is that clients just our team goes and tries to upsell and cross-sell our clients and turns into like a pushy sales organization,
like Wells Fargo.
Like Wells Fargo, exactly. So it's important to, again, with every benefit of open book management, there's challenges and risks that you just have to communicate and mitigate. But our team started looking at understanding how to look at financials and what COGS, cost of goods sold, what that means. The only thing we're not transparent about is we've got line items for salary, but we don't put everybody's up there. That's the one thing. But we had an analyst on the team who's looking at one of the search tools we were using. I'm not going to name names, but we were paying an extra $12,000 a year for a license of what I would call a nice to have tool. And he's like, well, I could pull those reports, and we could have our analyst team do that once a quarter, and found a different way to do it, saved $12,000, and someone else kind of found a few things in another area, and sure enough, that got us to the run rate we needed to hit. So nice. That's kind of I would say the big difference in terms of how we approach open book management is we want it to be actionable, and we want everybody to have a piece of the outcome when the company does well.
I like it. I think that's a good, that's very employee friendly, and usually it's employer friendly too. When things go well and everybody can benefit from it. So how is it like to have offices in multiple markets? I know you have an office in Chicago and in London.
And this hasn't been announced yet, but we just opened an office in Singapore a few days ago.
Wow.
So again, going where the food is. I didn't just decide we wanted to go to London and start from scratch and hope we can understand the EU, but found a very really awesome agency and trusted partner over there where we were already servicing some international clients. Yep. In addition to to the remote offices, we actually about 20 to 30% of our workforce has been remote.
Yep, I get it. Makes sense. Cool. So it sounds like an interesting dynamic, and I think it proves that really, again, you just go where the revenue is, where people need you, and you sort of listen to the voice of the customer and go from there. So when you were first getting started, what was the biggest challenge you went through?
It was, learning to, I would say we went through my story there, the shift from academia to business. It's been a challenge I've seen actually with some folks that have come with, a digital marketing certificate or degree, and, in school you've got a project for the quarter, and you think really hard, and you come up with strategies, and you write it, and you rewrite it, and, and you've got these theories, and then it's all these. It's there's the academic approach, and there's certainly times when you're dealing with client strategy where that approach is helpful. But then you get in the real world, and you have a budget to manage and goals to hit that month and that week. I think that's probably one of the toughest shifts from anybody coming from the academic world to business, where I'm like, we're an agency. Those were all great thoughts, but we got to get that campaign live tomorrow, so we need the ads now, and they need to be good.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear you on that one for sure. What's the future of paid social?
Wow, future of paid social. Well, it's not going away because every social platform raised a whole lot of money and they need to monetize their content. And last I checked, I don't think any teenagers are going to pay to use Facebook or Snapchat. So the future of paid social is bright because they've got the audience and they have to find ways to monetize it, right? Extension of native advertising and less intrusive ad formats. A lot of stuff that, you sort as a marketer, you sort of need to get into the mindset of each one of those platforms. I think two things are happening. One, the platforms, if they lose their users or they stop being cool, then they've lost everything. And of course, they need to monetize things at the same time. And another trend is just, Facebook understands that the closest, even as marketers and agencies are getting smarter about attribution and, cross device, cross channel, and understanding the value of those introducers, they're also realizing the closer they can get to the last click before a transaction, the more marketing dollars are going to flow. So we're starting to see a lot more direct response type ad units, whether it's lead ads on Facebook or the buy button, which has sort of made a lot of waves and then has been rather quiet. I think because customers are just not quite ready for it yet. But I think that's coming back. More of these direct response ad types. Again, these platforms, if they can prove that they're driving a sale and creating ad formats that are getting people to transact, they know that's where that's what's holding up the marketing dollars, right? Awareness is great, but CMOs have budgets and goals to hit that quarter, and the more that social platforms can get their customers and users in the buying mindset, they're going to get more dollars, and that's ultimately ad dollars are what's going to drive their value. So I think it's going to get more direct response.
Yep. Isn't it amazing how we could have given the exact same response 10 years ago for paid search? A very similar response, and that is these platforms start out by being the niche or especially people just trying it out and seeing what works. And then eventually the big business comes in and they figure out the business piece of it. And a lot of it does come down to attribution and just the different ways that that it's working, and then you can take it to a level from there. So last question is, what advice do you have for a new marketer, maybe somebody getting out of college or doing a career shift to get into digital marketing? What would you tell them? Where would they focus? What would you tell them to make sure they succeed?
So one of the shifts I think is as each of these channels is growing, there's opportunities to specialize, and I would start with some very introspective questions to make sure you understand what you really want to be doing. Because I think there's especially with an agency or especially as if you want to go client side and you're working at an enterprise company, make sure you find the areas that you're passionate about. Because I think as digital marketing was smaller and the budgets were smaller, there was more of a need to have a generalist who oversees content strategy and Facebook ads and retargeting and Google and marketing analytics. And as the budgets grow and as the focus is shifted to digital, there's a ton more opportunities to specialize, right? It's tough, especially, that's where I think agencies add a lot of value for an in-house team to find someone that's an expert in, I'm sure if you looked at their LinkedIn profiles, they're experts in analytics and SEO and paid search and paid social and content, but can you really be an expert in all of those things, right? So there's still a role, on the strategy side to have an understanding about everything that's going on. And, that is one thing I would always say is don't be too myopic, even if you are very focused. You need to understand how everything you do fits into the bigger picture. Find the area that you are most excited about.
Yeah.
I would say just focus on what you really want to be doing and what you think you're best at, and there's a niche for you out there. You just got to find it.
Yep, I agree. And it's all right to try quite a few things to see what you like and to see it's there. And it's all right to ride waves of luck. Awesome. So I think that's a great note to close on. Thanks so much for joining us on the podcast today, Dan.
Thanks for having me.
Well, that was a lot of fun. Dan and I stayed on the line after our chat to talk for a while, which was really an awesome punctuation mark. It was already a great interview. Always a connector. Dan made some introductions for me that have already started to pay off in many ways, even since our conversation. And how about that story about the Chicago Cubs game and how he started his business? That was great, especially since the Cubs are in the World Series now for the first time in what has been a long time. The World Series outcome won't be decided by the time this episode airs, but I wish his Cubbies the best. If there's ever a fan base more deserving of good things, it's the Cubs fans. Now, I don't quite have the same business origin story as Dan's Wrigley Field adventure, but I do have Wrigley Field adventures of my own. But those are NSFP, not safe for the podcast. So if you want to hear those, you might have to catch me in person sometime. Well, that's it for today's episode. Again, for show notes, visit Jeffalytics.com/golden.
Be found local or be found online, doesn't matter, they are there for you. Even under Wrigley's rooftop they care, so you don't fall through. Darn recruiters stalk your top dogs each night. You go to bed hoping that no one leaves the company, dude. Manage with books wide open. It's all the same whether SEO, cigar shop or music, just pursue it. Don't be myopic even if you're focused, find a better way and just do it.